Obrigada. Bom, vamos abrir então esse último painel do dia. Alguém gostaria de começar fazendo perguntas? Uma pergunta? Por favor, eu tenho ali um participante. Vamos esperar chegar o microfone. Tem outra pergunta? Ali, ó, por favor.
First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. How would you explain the decline of classical liberalism throughout the 20th century?
How would I explain the decline of classical liberalism throughout the 20th century? Well, again, we have to recognize that the classical liberals had very powerful enemies. Right? So who were the governments at the time? Primarily we had monarchical governments who were small by present-day standards, right? So I mean, even somebody like Louis XIV, he controlled a very tiny part, actually, of the GDP of France at the time, maybe 10 or 15%, which was next to nothing, right? So, but still, so they resented the loss of power that was inflicted on them by the rise of the classical liberal movement. So what they did was, in a way, very similar to what the various parts of the US administration have been doing in the past 20 years, ever since the Soviet Empire collapsed. Right? So the biggest part of American government spending, or federal spending, concerned the military. So that was no longer necessary, so they could have reduced spending, right? Reduced the apparatus and so on. They did the exact opposite while looking for new missions. And they did the same thing too. Right? So the British ruling class in the middle of the 19th century, when it was clear that the liberals were gaining the upper hand inside of the country, were then exporting their activities to other countries, starting the colonization movement, reinforcing the colonization movement in order to create jobs and revenues for the science of noble families. That's what they did. And then, of course, right, you have another wave of interventionism, right, because this creates, of course, hostile relationships abroad, so there are conflicts abroad, there's a greater necessity, so-called, so to say, to send more troops in, right? You get an endless sequence of further government interventions. So what they did was then, in a way, it was a very creative backlash. They invented new reasons to intervene and created new problems that the classical liberals had not yet addressed. Right? And forged new alliances. The most famous case was the one of Bismarck, so the representative of the old aristocratic ruling classes in Germany, who forged an alliance with the labor movement against the liberals. On the day when the German Allied forces had conquered Paris, there was the German-French War in 1870, 1871. On the day when the French had surrendered, Bismarck, right? Bismarck said, "Oh, how happy are we that finally the frogs have surrendered," or something like this. He didn't say that. He said, "Now the German liberals are done." Now the German liberals are done. Okay. So it was a relentless war with new techniques and so on, fought very creatively, and to which the classical liberals, or the liberals at the time, did not react with sufficient vigor at the beginning. And there was temptation that some of them were co-opted into the governments, or they got revenues and nice positions and so on. So I hope that all of you guys will stay very rich so that you cannot be tempted by government, right? But this, of course, that's what governments typically do. They try to corrupt the opposition. That's what they do in all African countries. They have ample resources to do so, right? So the libertarians, modern-day libertarians, need to be creative and inventive too, right? But we have, of course, a much more powerful intellectual arsenal today than we had in those days, right? Of course, also much more intelligence of the mechanisms of power and so on. But still, it's a very hard battle. And I don't say it's won from the outset, but I'm very optimistic that we will win.
Foi enviada uma outra pergunta, eu vou tentar traduzir. Do you believe that the Austrian school is the closest school to the Catholic ethic tradition?
Yes, yeah, I myself, I'm a Catholic, and it's not just my personal fancy, but again, I see that this traces back many centuries into the past. Right? The first intellectuals who had gained an understanding of how market works, and that markets are by and large spontaneous formations, were Catholic intellectuals, and they combined this with Catholic theology, and I still think that that's the case today. Now, as far as Austro-libertarianism is concerned as a political movement, of course, you don't have to be a Catholic in order to subscribe. Of course, as a Catholic, I'm particularly convinced that there's mutual reinforcement in several respects here, but even, let's say, if you're an atheist, you might come to the same political conclusion. Right?
Mais alguma pergunta da audiência? Vamos esperar só chegar o microfone, por favor, porque nós estamos transmitindo.
Okay, what you would say if they tried to intervene in the economic system, in the market, with some Catholic rules, let's say? What would be your opinion about that?
Yeah, I think that this would be a violation of what the church should stand for, right? The church, as you know, right, has for many centuries been crystal clear about the question whether there should be forced conversions, for example. Right? So from the 16th centuries, the Pope has stressed this, there should be no forced conversion. We have to respect the natural liberty of each individual person and so on. So, but if we are against forced conversions, then how can we force upon the population any other aspect, right, of Catholic doctrine? So this is contradictory, I think, and it would be destructive of religion, of organized religion. We see this in several countries in Europe. For example, in Germany, all bishops are paid by the state. All bishops are paid by the government out of church taxes collected by the federal government. France, it's similar. All right, the government pays for all churches and so on, for the maintenance. Now, I mean, if you consider this of course creates a very perverse incentive system, because then the clergy comes to identify with very secular concerns of the state and of the government out of material self-interest, just to keep the church activities going. This is destructive of the church. Therefore, church attendance is at an all-time low in Germany and also in France. We will get out of this only if there's a radical separation of the church from the state, right? You need everything that the state touches is a deadly grip, right? It's a kiss of death, right? So whatever you love, whether it's your language or your poetry or songs and so on, be sure there's no government intervention there. After 30 years, it's dead, you can be sure.
So on behalf of Mrs. Brazil, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. Thank you so much.